Lynn, carried?
Carried. Nope.
Okay, we're going to have to hold that and come back to it. Item number 3, Housing and Homelessness Investment Plan Delegation of Authority. Carried? Carried? Item number 4, Emergency Shelter Rooms Agreement with Private Hotels and Motels. We can hold. I was hoping not to keep the housing staff here all day, but is it short? Okay. Okay, so we'll take questions on item number 2. Councilor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on item number 2, I was just trying to understand. There seemed to be in the compliance declarations a whole series of reports that were in background of this piece that weren't part of the compliance declarations. There were annual reconciliation reports from 2016, and I'm just trying to understand: are those part of the documents which are the 2016 financial documents part of what is going to be conveyed to the LHIN? I found it confusing between the years. Are we dealing with fiscal year 2017, or are we dealing with fiscal year 2016, or both?
So, Madam Chair, we work off the ministry's calendar year for reporting. Their calendar year is April 1st to March 31st.
Okay, so if I look at the various compliance agreements, some are from January 1st, 2017 to December 31st, and then there are others that are from April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2018.
So the difference there is the LSAW, which is a long-term care service accountability agreement, goes from April 1st to March 31st, and the MSAW, which encompasses our day centers, goes from January 1st to December 31st. So the reporting timeframes are different on the two service agreements.
Okay, so given that all of the compliance agreements are for essentially fiscal year or calendar year 2017, is there any relevance to the annual reconciliation reports having been included as background documents for 2016?
Madam Chair, so the reconciliation is for the 2016 year, but we submit that in 2017.
Okay, so that had already been submitted because it
Yes.
was in the background documents for this item.
Right.
Why?
It's the supports the compliance. That's the kind of information that we need to validate that we've shared with the LHIN.
Okay, and so as a result of this information, is the city in compliance with all of the required deadlines for this information to be submitted?
Madam Chair, yes, we are.
So the LHIN isn't imposing any fines on the city as a result of this?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on item number 2? Seeing none. Is it received or carried? Received? Carried?
Carried.
Carried, thank you. And then item number 4, Councillor Nussbaum.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wondered if staff can comment on this. I know we passed the motion back in November. Is staff comfortable with this direction to them? Do they see any potential complications, or can this be rolled effectively into the work that's going to be taking place as part of the mid-year review of the Housing and Homelessness Plan?
Madam Chair, so we're comfortable with this particular motion. It is work that we can incorporate into some of the planning and review of all of our services and programs for the 10-year Housing and Homelessness Plan. We do continue, however, to be under some pressure in the city in terms of our overflow capacity. I think last time I was here, I talked about the rise in family homelessness, and that continues to be significant and sustained. So we can do the work, and certainly we'll come back and with some recommendations on how we can try and minimize or reduce the use of hotels and motels.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to get staff to elaborate further on if item 2 was passed, item 2 of Councillor Fleury's motion, because I'm concerned about potentially restricting the city's ability to find places, temporary places to house families, and there's probably a good reason why motels and hotels in Ward 12 have been relied upon in the past. So what will the net impact be on the city if there was pressure to look elsewhere than some of the current establishments that you've been using? I understand the councillor's concerns that he raised last year when this was being debated, but I don't know if it's affordability, if there's advantages to accommodating people in a similar neighborhood, if there's other services that need to be provided, but I'm just looking for a comment on what the impact will be.
Madam Chair, so we have implemented certain strategies within the family shelter system to try and create flow and momentum with families. Families are now considered for all housing across the city that's suitable to their family size in our social housing stock. And families must also accept their first offer of housing and exit the family shelter when that is made. So certainly we do have concerns in finding hotels and motels that will partner with us at the rates that we're able to afford. I think we will or have formed a small working group to reach out to other hotels and motels to try and ensure. We are geographically dispersed across the city right now in our hotel and motel usage. However, because these particular hotels, motels in Ward 12, we tend to use those more because they have more stock that's suitable and available to us at the time.
So I'm not sure how passing part 2 of this motion strengthens the city. I don't see how this makes things better. I don't see how this makes things better for families who need this type of service. So either staff needs to come out and say, we support this and we recommend the committee pass this, or we don't think there's net benefit and therefore we have concerns with this.
So, as pointed out in the motion, that there is a concentration in Councillor Fleury's ward, and the motion itself says we will bring back recommended actions. So when we do that, we will fully explore what any impact might be on any families as well as any associated cost. And if there are issues then moving forward, then we would look to committee and council for direction on those.
You don't get a point of clarification, but I will let you speak next. Is that it, Councillor Brockington?
Well, I understand as the motion is worded, it's asking staff to report back, which, as the motion says, include recommended actions to reduce. I'm not ready to endorse that direction because I have concerns with that, so I'm not going to say go ahead and do that work when I have concerns to begin with. I will listen to the ward councillor, and hopefully if I have concerns he can address them a bit further, but I just want to say, Madam Chair, I have concerns with part 2 of this motion.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Fleury. Councillor Nussbaum.
Well, I just wanted to address Councillor Brockington's concern, because I had a slightly similar concern as well. If you look at the first sentence of paragraph 2, we can all agree that that should be a goal. Absolutely. We want to reduce the use of motels and hotels for temporary overflow accommodation because ultimately you'd like to try and find permanent housing for those folks. But I think what I hear Councillor Brockington say is if we instruct staff to come back with options of dispersion that end up, say, costing a lot more money, and then as a result we're not able to house the number of people we would otherwise, I don't think anyone, including Councillor Fleury, would want that. So one idea, just to insert a little bit more flexibility to staff when they're reviewing the recommendations, is could we insert after ensure that in the second part of paragraph, ensure that, comma, when possible, comma. So equity should be the goal, absolutely, but that's got to be balanced by affordability, availability, accessibility, etc. But I think the sense of the spirit of this is clear, that Councillor Fleury is looking to make sure that his ward doesn't become the single destination, or if there are options to spread out the load a little bit better. So the words "when possible" might address Councillor Brockington's concern, and so I introduced that as a friendly amendment.
Is that friendly to you, Councillor?
Yes, but before the conversation goes further, I just want to be clear as to the objective of the motion is that basically staff are to review their approach and come back to committee with their recommendations. I've identified a problem, and then they'll come back as to what are the pieces that could come in play that would resolve this issue. So I don't believe that this binds staff or committee at this point, but it does give direction to the city to go back and do a review of the issue that I've discovered.
Thank you. Councillor Egli.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just need a little bit further clarification in terms of when you're going to come back to us with recommended actions to reduce the use of hotels. I'm interested in what criteria you're going to be looking at. We heard you talk about price point, a working group to find. The other piece that concerns me a little bit with dispersion is that we have motels and hotels right across the city, but they're not necessarily properly positioned, if you will, in terms of access to support networks. Because we just don't want to house people, we want to help people. So I don't know that it needs to be in the motion. If you can tell me that part of what you're going to be looking at is not just can we find more hotels and motels, but can we, for lack of a better term, can we find the right hotels and motels? In other words, that they will still allow access to job retraining programs or social service, whatever the need is, so that we're simply not housing people, but as I say, we're actually helping people with these new locations as well.
So, Madam Chair, to your point about price point, absolutely we look at things like access, we look at things like choice in terms of proximity to either daycare or employment, we look at accessibility as well as access to kitchens. So those are all things that we take into consideration. And going back to my earlier comment in terms of bringing back recommendations, they will not only include impact from a financial perspective, but potential impact on families as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Egli. Councillor Fleury, did you want to wrap up?
I did. So on wrap up, just a couple of elements for committee to consider. One, which is we want to make sure that no one's left on the street, and that's not the message that we're trying to send out of that motion. If there are folks that need emergency response, that the right bedrooms and the amount of bedrooms and services are in place. So I want to be clear as to the intent of the motion. I want to go back to the committee and the discussion on the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, which we went into an important discussion that got us to the per-night costs per family, per motel or hotel. And I believe the number was $130 per night.
Madam Chair, the average is $110 per night.
So $110 per night, and we have how many families?
We currently have about 182 families that are in off-site services.
And they're there for, on average, I think we said 5 months last time. We went into 180 days was the...
Well, we've had an increase in families that are staying there for longer than 180 days. So the average, I would say, is anywhere between kind of 6 and 9 months at this point.
So further to the point, right now we're in the XY discussion, but I think there's a Z element. There's a third element, which is right now we're looking at it from, there's a need, and we're putting people in motels and hotels, but all that is funds that we're reaching into, millions of dollars, that are going to temporary measures for families. So that's also part of the conversation in the review, that in my mind, how do we reduce the amount of hotels and motels while offering an opportunity for stabilization. So I just want to be clear as to the goals, and obviously if we're able to decentralize the approach, because affordability can't be the only one, or else we continue to degrade the quality of the rooms that those hotels are offering. I'd be glad to walk you through some of the hotels, and I'd love to challenge you on if that's the right value for money. So in my mind, this gives us an opportunity for staff to do a fulsome review and come back with options.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fleury. Carried on the recommendations? Okay, so Councillor Brockington wants to dissent on recommendation 2. Is everybody else fine? So we'll record it that way, Councillor. And that's carried. Yes, it's accepted as friendly. So Councillor Brockington, on item number 1, long-term care homes, third-party independent review, there's a procedural motion. Could you read it, please?
Yes, I can, Madam Chair. So again, for item 1, whereas the supporting documentation titled Long-Term Care Services Third-Party Review was not circulated with the agenda package, therefore be it resolved that the Community and Protective Services Committee approve the addition of this document for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to section 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2016-377.
We'll turn then to item number 1, long-term care homes, third-party independent review and related matters. And Ms. Burrell, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of CPS. I'm joined today by Lise Girard. She is the administrator of Carlton Lodge, as well as Mr. Dean Lett, who's the acting director of the 4 long-term care homes, as well as Mr. Greg Fougere, who we recruited to complete the independent third-party review of our homes. So Greg has come to us highly recommended. He has a master's in health administration and is certified in health as an executive. He has over 35 years of experience, and from being an orderly in the hospitals to a CEO of the Pearly for over 17 years. The Pearly is a 450-bed home. It also offers other services such as assisted living, dementia respite, and senior days program. He has received several awards for his work and is recognized for his expertise and passion in the areas of seniors care and services. So we have been working very closely with Mr. Fougere for the last 6 months. We've met with him pretty much every 2 weeks, where he's provided us with briefings and updates. So this morning, what you have in front of you is Greg's slide deck, where he will be presenting his findings and his recommendations. You also have a staff transmittal report that is an executive summary from Mr. Fougere, as well as that consolidated work plan that staff will speak to after Greg's presentation. So at this point, I would turn the presentation over to Greg to review his findings and recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Madam Chair, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to present the results of the independent review, which began November 1st. So it's now 6 months that I've been involved with the city. As Janice pointed out, I, throughout the review, met with senior staff and kept them abreast of the findings, the issues that I was seeing, recommendations, as well as all of the positive care and services that I was seeing in the home. So before the report is provided to you, I ensured that staff, because the majority of the report are management-related recommendations. The mandate that I was given was to review the 3 years from 2015 to 2017 and to identify influencing factors that may have contributed to the incidents of abuse and neglect that were reported in the media last year. I'd like to acknowledge the 2 residents that were abused and their families. It caused tremendous stress for everyone involved. And those the families, certainly one of the families spent quite a bit of time with me providing their views. The City of Ottawa operates 4 long-term care homes. The number of residents range from 160 to 216. There are 1,000 staff working in the 4 city homes, and $66 million is the annual ongoing operating costs, and $350,000 is the annual currently approved capital budget. As you are all aware, the homes received an order and a director's referral by the province under the long-term care legislation. I witnessed how hard and diligent staff were at dealing with the issues that were brought forward. Compliance is quite separate from what my review entails. However, I will acknowledge that because of that work, the City of Ottawa long-term care homes were returned to compliance in January of this year. And everyone's nightmare, that thing doesn't work. I will await someone to correct the issue. Thank you. So, with that, I'd like to review the mandates and methodologies. So the mandate was 3 years, 2015 to 2017. Phase 1, starting November 1st, I was in the 4 long-term care homes over 6 days in each home to mid-December. I shadowed personal support workers while they were providing care, and I assisted at mealtimes in order to observe the interactions between staff and residents and that critical time in residents' days. Phase 2 involved taking the themes from Phase 1 and then looking in depth in city documents to validate or not the themes that were coming out of the review. The 240 interviews that I completed, 140 of them were over 15 minutes, and some of them were 2.5 hours. So it was quite an extensive review. There was a complete research and literature review. I was fortunate to benefit from Andrea Liu's research, and the report that I've presented provides detailed annotated bibliography on abuse and neglect in long-term care homes, as well as a comprehensive literature review. There are numerous strategies to deal with potential influencing factors of abuse and neglect, and all of those strategies are within the report and the research. My review focuses, though, on pretty well 8 themes. I've now brought it down to 8 themes that need attention. Stage 3 was synthesizing everything from those 2 phases, as well as external interviews, and developing a recommendations report out. The mandate was very specific, that it was related to staff-to-resident abuse and resident-to-resident abuse during that period of time to identify the influencing factors, which I would call risk factors, okay? And based on those risk factors, identify actionable recommendations. And thus, there's quite a detailed list of options, recommendations for staff to consider to deal with these influencing factors. So, from the review in the homes, what did I find? Well, it's very important to remember that positive stories outpace the negative. The majority of staff are caring and strive to do their best. I saw that every time I went into the 4 homes. And one personal support worker early on said to me, "You have the time, you have the will, you just don't have the time." And that was a consistent theme throughout the review. I interviewed staff, volunteers, residents, and families, and consistently the issue of staffing and time was #1 priority. And one could say, well, that's always #1 priority, more staff. No matter what situation, you could use more staff to accomplish. In this situation, as you will see in the presentation, it is an important first action that I recommend that the city increase staffing levels, especially of personal support workers. And I'll explain why, and I'll explain the cost of that shortly. Satisfaction in the homes is good to excellent. The majority of capable residents, although they are the smaller group of residents, because most residents, or the majority of residents, have dementia, but the capable residents felt safe and were in control of their care. However, the concerns that I heard were from families of residents who are affected by dementia. And the concern that families have, although staff-to-resident abuse is one issue that was raised throughout the review, there's a tremendous amount of worry because of the coverage of the 2 abuse situations last year. The families are more concerned about resident-to-resident abuse. I think that's really important to remember when you hear what's coming. I'm going to look back to this because it's really important. I really fear that the rest of the presentation will take the attention off the good care that's being provided in the 4 homes. And staff are hurting right now. There's a lot of staff that are excellent staff, that are not abusive, that are not supportive of staff that abuse, that are quite appalled by it, but they're getting painted or tainted with the same brush. And I think it's really important that City Council support the staff through this difficult time. I found no evidence of additional physical and verbal assaults of the nature of the 2 abuses last year that reported in the media. However, I did find evidence of some emotional abuse, staff to resident emotional abuse, as well, and the higher prevalence are issues of neglect. What's the cause of this? Well, there's 2 causes. One is systemic, and some of those systemic issues are issues that you can deal with as a council, and some are individual staff risk factors, which management will deal with. The definitions of abuse and neglect are before you. They're specific and come from the Long-Term Care Homes Act. They are the definitions in the city policy regarding abuse and neglect. So emotional abuse is any threatening, insulting, intimidating, or humiliating gesture, action, and you see the rest of the list. Neglect is an action or an inaction related to treatment, care, services, and assistance. We did a very, very detailed review of all of the annual resident quality inspections from compliance review, all of the complaint investigations, and all of the critical incidents from 2015 to 2017. And from that, we were being able to identify patterns of neglect that need to be identified. Some of the areas that were highest risk in that review were continence care, mealtime, snack time, personal hygiene, transfers, bath time, restraint use, and positioning of residents in bed or in their assistive devices. I read this list because it's really important for all of you to understand that these issues are issues that need attention, and I would say need attention quite soon, very quickly. The key influencing factors are nursing and personal care and staffing. The resident mix, I'll discuss all of these shortly. Communication, it was a dominant theme throughout the review. Human resources leadership, quality and risk oversight, both from a management and a council perspective. The volunteer base, design issues, and essential equipment. So these are the key influencing factors, the key risk factors that I've identified, and from which I've identified a number of recommendations to help manage this risk. The first area is nursing and personal care hours. What's before you is perhaps complex to review today, but as you review it, you will see that the City of Ottawa needs to increase the number of personal support workers. This is the main area in which the city falls behind the provincial average for nonprofit homes in Ontario. There's also a need to increase the registered staff, and I'll speak to that. What does this mean? What it means is, on average, at City of Ottawa long-term care homes, there is 18 minutes less care for every resident every day than the 2016 nonprofit average. Those areas that I just listed of neglect, many of them will be dealt with through an increase in personal support worker staffing. However, I want to make it very clear, increased staffing is not the panacea to deal with the issue of abuse, neglect, and long-term care. It's one factor, it's an important factor, and if council does not deal with this, it's going to be very hard to deal with the other influencing factors that I'm raising today. What would be required for that 18 minutes a day increase are two things. One is an additional 35 full-time equivalent personal support workers. En addition, il faut faire appel à 5,5 infirmières autorisées de plus pour égaler les moyennes de l'Ontario en 2016. I'm recommending that the nursing management structure be reviewed. Currently, there's one structure which is not the traditional structure, and there are some issues that perhaps can be dealt with by looking at different structures. Currently in the homes, one of the ways that City of Ottawa, and indeed other long-term care homes, have dealt with staffing issues is to introduce short shifts. For example, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the evening. It gives more assistance with mealtime, gives more assistance with evening care. However, they are the hardest shifts to fill. Once they are filled and a full-time shift comes up, staff will move to the full-time shift, obviously. So it's not working. And it's not only with the City of Ottawa, a number of homes have found that this does not work well. A constant theme at all four homes was that there were issues regarding staff suitability. So I repeat, most staff are caring, most staff are providing good care. However, there is a percentage, and what the phrase that I heard often is there are staff that are working here just for the money. Long-term care is not a place for staff to work just for the money. Good long-term care involves relationship building and compassion. And if you're there just for the money, then you're not going to have the compassion that's needed in this type of care. Currently, the city provides additional funding in about $14.5 million because of higher wages at the city than the average long-term care home. This is historical collective agreement, as well as issues like pay equity in the city drive wages up. There are other issues of funding that need a discussion with the province of Ontario also. However, what we're dealing with here is which level of government funds the need for the staffing that I'm recommending. I recommend that personal support workers be involved in peer-to-peer training, peer-to-peer education on areas that they're normally responsible for. For example, one risk area is transfers, transferring residents from their bed to a chair, transferring residents from their chair to the bath, transferring residents in other ways. Personal support workers are able to provide that training, and it provides certainly an opportunity and a recognition of their skills. One theme, and it comes up again with families that I also heard consistently, is that staff need more education on dementia. And that's not to say that there is not already education. In fact, there's a tremendous amount of education on dementia for personal support workers and other nursing staff. However, it's still a theme that more is required. Pour les infirmières, des infirmières proposées, je suggère que nous ayons un partenaire afin excusez-moi, pour toutes les francophones ici, mon français n'est pas si bon aujourd'hui que d'habitude. Mais il faut qu'on ait un partenaire afin d'établir un cours de certification pour les préposés de soins. One thing that is occurring that is really hurting care is temporary movement of staff for temporary positions. When I was reviewing, for example, there was a temporary position came up, and there were 8 applicants from the other homes for the temporary position. You know, consistency in staffing is a number one issue in long-term care for good care also. So I'm recommending that that movement stop. Now, some of these require, obviously, negotiation with the union, in this case with CUPE, and I'm recommending that the union also be part of the solutions here. When I met with CUPE, CIPP, with staff, everyone had the same common goal, and that was to provide the best care that's possible. So it means that everyone has to come to the table to resolve this issue. One issue at the city long-term care homes, and again, this is an issue at other long-term care homes, is the resident mix. There's a misconception that every long-term care bed is the same. And this is a misconception that needs to end. There are complex special needs that residents have, and there are specialized dementia care needs that residents have. So in your accountability agreement with the LHIN, you are to provide 717 regular long-term care beds. There's no such thing as a regular long-term care bed. It's the way it's classified, but this has become much more complex long-term care. Residents have very special needs in long-term care. Long-term care homes, of course, city homes, are not retirement homes. There's a huge amount of a number of retirement homes which provide another option. And even within retirement homes, there is some care being provided for those people that can afford to add on the care. However, once people get to a certain level and the complexity that I'm showing, long-term care home is probably the place that they will move. So I'm not going to read this entire list, but I'll give you an example of a few things. You have to look at the complexity of the resident to be admitted. You have to look at dementia and what are the behaviors associated with dementia that need to be managed or cared for. What's a vac dressing? It's a vacuum-assisted closure to a wound. So these are wounds that are beyond a scratch. These required vacuum-assisted closure. What's a PICC line? A PICC line is a peripherally inserted central catheter. And residents have PICC lines. Residents have intravenous therapy. So there are a number of special needs here in long-term care homes that I believe not only for the city, but for the province, that we are not yet addressing the complexity of resident care in the way we need to. I believe that the city homes could create program descriptions. There are 2 main programs the city offer for long-term care. One I call physical functional decline, and the other I call secure dementia care. They are very different. I think attention and priority needs to be given to the program descriptions for dementia care. There's a need to balance the complex need through the admission process. So when a bed comes up in the long-term care homes, it's not just the next person on the waiting list of the local health integration network. They already prioritize based on need. However, the homes may not be able to admit someone with some of the special needs when a bed comes up. It may be wait until the appropriate bed comes up and then we'll admit you. We are really overloading long-term care homes, including city homes. And I don't mean that in a negative way for the residents, because the residents have true needs. But we are then putting them in a situation often where it tips the balance, and then everyone, all residents, will be affected in some way. I believe that admissions coordinator position should be put in place. I believe two of the homes, one admissions coordinator and the other two, another admissions coordinator could assist in this situation. The last point is the social worker role needs to change, I believe, because there's a tremendous amount of time being spent on the admission process versus social work, and I believe that families affected by dementia need more attention. It's the families I'm talking about. Often in the care and long-term care, families require care and attention also for their loved ones who have dementia. Because of the situation with staffing levels, the complexity of secure dementia care, and as you'll see later, design, I'm recommending that the City of Ottawa reduce the number of dementia secure resident home areas from 6 to 4. Again, I want to step back now and tell you, personal support workers have 6 to 8 months of education beyond high school. Registered staff, registered practical nurses, and registered nurses have much more education. Obviously, they are part of, under the Regulated Health Professions Act, and report to a College of Nurses. So it's very important to understand the difference in the skills of personal support workers. Many personal support workers come into long-term care without having much experience in seniors care, and a lot of them have no experience in dementia care. So they need continual ongoing support. Again, the theme of dementia care came out, and families need dementia care education as much as staff. One of the approaches in dementia care is called gentle persuasion approach. And this is what personal support workers receive for assisting with residents who have behaviors that are resulting from their dementia, whether that be physical, whether that be verbal. And families need to understand what the gentle persuasion approach is. For example, I'll give you an example. If you go into a room in the morning with a resident, that resident has dementia, and today's not a good day, and you try and shave, let's say it's me, and you try and shave me, and it's not a good day, I may just lash out at you and just hit you. Okay? There needs to be an understanding that sometimes the personal support worker will have to back away, and when the family comes in and their loved one's not shaved, there's a reason, and that the family understands the reason, because that wasn't the right time for it to occur, or aggression probably would have increased and there would have been a bad outcome. That's one example. There are many others. I believe that it would be important to negotiate a voluntary exchange between the physical functional decline, resident home areas, and secure dementia programs, because not everybody wants to work with residents with dementia. This is not a bad thing. This is very good that people recognize that they don't necessarily want to work with people with dementia. However, the reality is people have mortgages, people have responsibilities, and if they're working part-time in an area they're comfortable with and a full-time position comes up in dementia care, probably they're going to move to that full-time position. Well, there may be a need to offer staff the opportunity to move, not, just move, say it's a day shift full-time to another day shift full-time and another level of care. No loss, no change to the staff member other than getting them to the right level of care. Communication was a huge issue and theme. Obviously, staff are rushed. Affected by the workload. There are insensitive directives to residents. This is the emotional abuse. There are disrespectful comments. Sometimes staff speak a different language while they're providing care. Families and residents often reported they did not understand staff. And it's been discussed before, there's a need for sensitivity to linguistic and cultural needs of some residents, and even down to body language and a simple smile. These were areas of communication that needed to be worked on. So, obviously, I'm recommending education for effective communication. There's a shift change report. These are 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operations, right? And each shift has a shift change report where they communicate changes in the resident's status to the next shift. There's a need for improvement in these reports. Some of the shift change reports that I saw really would not communicate the information of personal support workers that they need for various reasons. One is often they're in rooms that are very small and staff are outside the rooms and it's hard to hear. Other reasons are the nature and the way the report is given. The internal and external communications need to be improved, and this is one area that I think Council will benefit from, is a refreshed website with risk and quality information on it. You'll see later, I'm recommending that Council have another forum in which to receive and discuss risk and quality information. But websites, if you look at long-term care homes that are in the lead, they are providing and are accountable to the community by sharing that information and sharing what they're doing about these situations. Also, there are no newsletters in the homes, so this is something else. It's simple, but all of this builds trust. All of this builds openness. Human resources and labor relations are not well integrated to support the 4 homes. Very much what I heard through the review was mainly a labor relations perspective. There's no one in the homes to provide the human resource leadership. So I'm recommending that a dedicated human resource manager be established for the 4 homes. There's 1,000 staff working in the 4 homes. The current structure with the ministry does not support the administrators and managers. I truly believe that if you implement a human resource manager, if staff implement a human resource manager and receive the funds for that in fact your labor relations issues will decline. That should be an outcome. There has been, in some cases, there has been management education and long-term care experience needed to be increased, and they need to be increased now. And search broadened. Right now, and up to this point in time, the search has been limited to two vehicles, and I'm recommending a broadened search for the director and administrator positions as they become available. There's also some staff-to-staff relationship issues that need attention, and in one home, they need more attention at this time, and I'm recommending a staff development position. The administrators and the managers simply do not have enough time to deal with all the staff development issues and staff relations. This affects care. It's a huge impact on care. So for quality and risk oversight, on the management perspective, there was a high level of instability between 2015 and 2017. There were 52 changes in that 3-year period in 21 manager positions. You can't lead an organization and deal with the kind of change that's required with this type of instability. 43 were transfers between homes or within homes and within positions. Provides no continuity in management. There were people that were assigned to temporarily to administrator positions through the years that did not have the management education and long-term care qualifications. All of this has an impact. So I'm recommending that temporary transfers be stopped, except for emergency, short-term situations. There's a need for a new nursing practice manager on the senior management team and a dedicated quality risk manager. For council recommendations, there's one recommendation for you. Your mandate as a Community Protective Services Committee, as you well know, is very, very broad. You do not have the time here to discuss the details related to quality and risk for long-term care homes. So I'm recommending that you create a long-term care board of directors. Your terms of reference allow for it. And that long-term care board of directors should also include I'm recommending 6 additional community positions, and that a skills matrix be developed for these positions. In order to provide the right level of oversight at a council level, you need to have the right skill mix on this committee, obviously led by a councillor from the committee. Or 2, it depends on what model you wish to implement. There's good information that you can start with, and this can start now. And there's a requirement in Ontario under Health Quality Ontario to develop a quality improvement narrative. So what this means is you can receive information right now on this narrative and see what the issues are that need to be dealt with in terms of improvement. Every year you consider an annual budget. Between 2015 to 2017, there was no increase in budget despite a 1% increase in the level of care in Ontario each year in long-term care. Okay? You need to add a risk assessment to your annual budget process. You do have the format for it, but I didn't see the risk assessment at a level that I feel that is appropriate. There's been a decline in volunteers in the 3 years I reviewed. In one home particularly, there was a fair decline. This has occurred also because of some of the movement of managers, I believe. But there needs to be an increase in volunteers. There's 570 volunteers at the 4 homes, so this is great, and this is a high number of volunteers, but more are needed. And I hope the community steps up and contacts the 4 homes and offers assistance. One particular practical consideration is more assistance at mealtime and shift change monitoring, because there's not too many staff around when you have groups of people with dementia that may have behaviors and strike out or be verbally assaultive. If more volunteers are around to alert staff that there's a situation where they need to intervene, that would be very helpful. So all of these types of recommendations will require further discussions. Some of them may require discussion with the unions. As I said earlier, I'm hoping the unions will come to the table as partners in dealing with some of these issues. There is a sense that the union is representing staff who are not suited for long-term care and who may have performance issues. They're pursuing it, and it is to the point that it is affecting other staff and care. And I had to bring up on a number of times, I said to staff, please speak to your union. You're telling me this, you're concerned about the performance of other people. I heard staff say, you know, I've told the union and this doesn't have an impact, or nothing will be done. It's another issue with management or union that I've told them and nothing will be done. This has to be done.
Mr. Frugero,
yes?
Could you please speak directly into the mic? I'm told that some people are having trouble hearing you.
Certainly.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, but sorry.
I heard myself. Anyway, sorry about that. Also, there's a need to look at innovative programs like music therapy and dance therapy for people affected by dementia. It's amazing how you can deal with issues of the behaviors that may come as a result of a dementia through one-on-one music therapy, through dance therapy. This isn't recreation, bringing in a musical group. That's all important and entertaining as part of a resident's life, important part. This is therapy. These are staff positions. The buildings are 13 to 30 years old, and the 30-year-old building is actually 50 years old, but had a major renovation 30 years ago. The designs are reflective of the resident care needs at the time in the decade they were built. The oldest designs significantly increase risk for residents with dementia and should be the highest priority for change. There's one particular home, since the 30-year renovation, that I think will be extremely hard to retrofit to deal with the risk issues. Just imagine there's a huge area in front of 2 elevators in a secure an area with demented residents. There are wings that go off where staff are in rooms providing care. There's a real potential for resident-to-resident abuse if the design is not appropriate. In this design, also, the dining room is off to one side. It's going to be very hard to deal with that issue. So I'm recommending in that case that, in fact, the unit change from a secure dementia unit to a physical functional decline unit, and that, in fact, one of the resident home areas at Gary J. Armstrong be changed to serve Francophone residents. $350,000 for capital equipment for the 4 homes is simply not enough. I didn't go in any great detail to analyze this, but I know intuitively, I know from my experience that it's not enough. For the beds, mechanical lifts are 2 key pieces of equipment that there's a need to continually replace. I'm recommending that you close the gap, that you ask staff to bring back for next year's budgeting process the gap analysis between the $350,000 for budget and the 10-year capital plan. Information technology is something that is changing as we speak. I understand that there'll be a new resident assessment instrument software implemented in the fall. This is the critical tool for communicating the needs of residents in long-term care. It also is a critical tool that will provide council the quality and risk data you need to provide your oversight. What does this all mean at the end of the day? You need 35 more full-time equivalent personal support workers to get to the average of other non-profit long-term care homes in Ontario. So you need to come up so there's a level playing field with where other homes are. Those 35 personal support workers will cost $2.3 million annually. I suggest 5.5 to 6 positions, new positions: nursing practice manager, quality and risk manager, human resources manager, admission coordinators, and staff development resource persons. So in addition to the nursing recommendations, I believe this is important. Registered staff increases need a bit more study. As was in a previous slide, there's a need to increase your registered staff by just over 5 full-time equivalent staff to reach the 2016 average. I want to now come back because I've been providing a lot of information to you that identifies the influencing factors and the risks. These are serious. However, I do not want to end this presentation suggesting that good care isn't being provided, because that's not true. Care is good to excellent. What I observed in many cases, I'll tell you a few stories. A personal support worker was working with a resident who had dementia, and the resident was physically fighting back. Unusual. Until the personal support worker figured out that it was the red shirt he was wearing. He left, changed his shirt, came back, and everything was fine. Care was fine. So that shows at the personal support worker level the kind of sensitivity some staff have. I was in the homes at 6 o'clock in the morning on at least once over the week, and I saw residents coming, again, residents with dementia, coming out to the nursing area, and they were smiling. They approached the staff. There was no sense of fear. They didn't give me any sense that there were any issues with care. Families went to pains. I walked out of one of the homes, was walking out of one of the homes, where the wife of a resident, who I also had spoke to earlier, he was going out for care at a hospital because of a certain issue, And she said, "Oh, I'm glad I saw you." Like as she's going out the door with an ambulance and so on, the care is great here. You know, so story after story after story, I heard good care. However, in order to deal with the issues that are before you that resulted potentially in abuse, you need to deal with the influencing factors that I'm raising today. So thank you very much. And je m'excuse que j'ai pas parlé en français. J'espère qu'avec les questions, je peux reprendre mieux que j'ai présenté.
Merci, Monsieur Fougere. Thank you very much for your very thorough and well-considered report and your recommendations. I think what you've done is really paint a picture for the committee of the complexity of the challenges that are faced in long-term care. But you've also given us, I think, a roadmap to improve long-term care in our city. So for that, we're very thankful. What we're going to do is we're going to take questions to Mr. Fougere first. When we're finished with all the questions to Mr. Fougere, we're going to hear the staff response, and then we'll be able to ask staff questions. But before we do that, I want to just put a motion on the table that the mayor and I have been working on over the weekend, so that you will have that as a backdrop when you ask your questions. So I apologize for my voice today. It's just, I guess, too much partying at that OAG on the weekend or something. I'm not sure what. But anyway, it's caught up with me today. Whereas both the independent review and staff benchmarking has found that city residents receive an average of 18 minutes less nursing and personal care for each resident per day than the 2016 Ontario nonprofit average, and whereas the independent review has recommended that 35 additional personal support workers are required to provide optimal care and reduce the risk for abuse and neglect, with an estimated operating budget impact of $2.3 million, and whereas staff has reported that there was a consistent message across the board that more personal support workers and more training and direct involvement of personal support workers in care is a high priority, and whereas the 2019 budget is not expected to be adopted until March 2019, and this is too long for residents in our homes to wait for more care, and whereas staff has advised that they can accelerate the hiring of the 35 personal support workers this year with a 2018 part-year impact of an estimated $800,000, and whereas the city treasurer has advised that there are sufficient funds in the one-time and unforeseen account to permit the accelerated hiring of these workers in 2018. Therefore, be it resolved that the Community and Protective Services Committee recommend that City Council approve that 35 new additional FTEs in long-term care services for personal support workers, and that $800,000 be provided from the one-time and unforeseen account to permit the hiring to take place in 2018. So before we move to questions, I just want to take a quick moment to just to introduce this motion that I have just read. Our long-term care homes provide service to some of our most vulnerable citizens, and we know that each one deserves to live in a safe and comfortable home. I know that our staff are taking the recommendations provided to them by Mr. Fougere very seriously. It has become abundantly clear from both the Auditor General's report this morning and from Mr. Fougere that our homes are understaffed and immediate action is necessary. With that in mind, the Mayor and I have been collaborating to provide our long-term care staff with the resources they need to address these recommendations. The motion today asks this committee to recommend Council approve the hiring of 35 new FTEs for personal support workers at the cost of $800,000. The full-year impact of $2.3 million staffing costs will be addressed in the 2019 budget. And I know Mr. Lett will elaborate on this later, but the question around registered nursing positions, I know there was money in the 2018 provincial budget, and we are anticipating new registered nurses positions coming to us as a result of the provincial budget. Furthermore, at the FedCo committee tomorrow, the committee will be asked to approve an additional $1 million in long-term care investment for training, equipment, and IT upgrades, with flexibility delegated to the general manager to use some of the $1 million as needed to augment the $800,000 for hiring. So if it takes more, if we can get it done sooner and it takes more than the $800,000, the general manager will have the flexibility to use some of the $1 million in one-time capital funding in order to make sure that we hire as many staff as quickly as possible. So the overall investment in 2018 of $1.8 million, I think, based on what we've heard today, is a vital step in ensuring that our residents are provided the care they deserve. So with that said, we're going to now go to questions to Mr. Fougere, and we'll start with Councillor Eglai.
Actually, my questions are for staff, so.
Okay, so then Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Vous êtes confortable en français, sinon je peux... C'est Fouchard? OK. Donc, moi, ça fait 8 ans que je suis élu, puis à chaque 2-3 fois par année, je vais visiter de façon plus officielle les centres de longue durée. Puis, ce que je remarque, puis c'est peut-être pas évident, vous avez fait une revue d'une période, c'est un petit peu un flash, mais pour moi, l'environnement a demeuré le même, mais je peux juste parler des centres qui sont dans ma communauté. Gary J. Armstrong, Centre d'accueil Champlain, sont les deux dans ma communauté. Physiquement, l'espace est bon. L'énergie semble bonne. On voit beaucoup d'entraide des familles qui sont présentes. J'ai pas le pouls du jour au jour, mais ce que j'observe, c'est vraiment que les besoins des résidents qui se retrouvent dans nos centres sont de plus en plus criants. Avant, tout le monde était capable de se déplacer, tout le monde était capable de se nourrir. Quand je dis tout le monde, je généralise, mais il y avait une grande majorité des gens qui étaient actifs. Vous parliez tout tantôt de l'infolette, d'un newsletter. C'était bon quand tout le monde était actif, puis il y avait une présence. Mais quand là on va, il y a beaucoup de gens qui sortent même pas de leur chambre parce que physiquement, psychologiquement, pour des raisons de santé chronique, ils sont plus capables. Alors, moi, j'ai une question peut-être encore plus macro que ce que vous présentez. C'est quoi le rôle des soins de longue durée? Est-ce que c'est devenu des hôpitaux? Parce que il y a beaucoup les besoins sur nos employés, c'est très similaire aux soins hospitaliers complexes. Là. Alors, j'aimerais ça comprendre d'après vous. Moi, en 8 ans, j'ai vu une transformation drastique. Là. Alors, où on s'en va? Là? Est-ce qu'on continue à s'en aller vers une approche qui est très hospitalière? Ou est-ce que... Parce que là, moi, ce que je remarque, c'est que dans notre communauté, on a des besoins encore plus vastes. Je suis le président de logement communautaire à Ottawa. On a des personnes aînées qui se retrouvent dans des bâtiments, qui sont isolés, qui remplissent tous les critères pour être dans nos soins de longue durée. Mais là, il n'y a plus de place. Là. Alors, moi, j'aimerais ça que vous reculiez un petit peu puis vous nous donniez une impression plus vaste du système, parce que je pense qu'il y a un plus gros problème qui n'est peut-être pas discuté en ce moment.
Merci. Je pense que vous avez expliqué ça très bien. Et le niveau de soins a changé beaucoup. Maintenant, on appelle les foyers les homes, les maisons, mais c'est pas une maison. Maintenant, il y a beaucoup plus de soins médicaux et autres soins. Le rôle je pense que le Local Health Integration Network est responsable pour les listes d'attente. Et il y a beaucoup de pression accepter les résidents avec les soins à un niveau très, très, très haut. Et le problème pour les foyers est que chaque lit n'est pas la même chose. Chaque lit a sa chance. Il faut que on est flexible avec ça, mais on a besoin d'avoir une balance de soins sur une unité. Okay? Et ça, c'est l'objectif. Mais de temps en temps, c'est difficile quand le système, quand le besoin est très haut et il y a besoin. Mais la ville d'Ottawa, avec ses ressources, n'est pas capable, et aussi autres foyers, n'est pas capable de prendre tout le monde avec tous ses besoins. Et c'est constamment une question de balance, flexibilité. Mais maintenant, j'ai vu, et j'ai regardé, et j'ai entendu que le soin est de temps en temps trop lourd faire bien. Est-ce que ça répond?
Maybe as a follow-up, you talked about the LHIN specifically, and in my mind, there's something to be said around our duty and responsibility as a city. I think officially in regulation, we're mandated to operate one long-term care facility. I believe it's 4, right, that we operate currently?
From 717 residents.
Yeah. So I wonder, understanding the waiting list, understanding this need that's more and more almost on the border of hospital care, and where there's less and less independence of the residents, where you see that land, because we're only pushing the people that should be in our long-term cares are in housing in our community struggling, and that adds pressure elsewhere. So, it's not just about the services, it's also about the waiting list, and, these pieces kind of play together. So I wonder if you're not seeing just a need, like hospitals are not keeping the folks long enough, and then there's no other options then to come into to our centers, and how do you see that being resolved? I don't know if I guess that's my core question is, at which point does it not become a city responsibility and it's a provincial healthcare one?
Well, in fact, as you probably are aware, health care is a provincial responsibility, not necessarily a city responsibility. However, the City of Ottawa homes and the 4 homes in some way have existed for decades. So there's been an identification by the city that you want to be in the caring business for seniors in your community. Here's the situation. There are people in the community that have the same high level of care as people in long-term care, and they are receiving that care through the local health integration network, either home care, the assistance of neighbors, the assistance of families, and so on, and they're staying where they want to be in their own home. Okay? And some people struggle to do that, but that's what they prefer to do. They are making that choice. Sometimes you have couples where one couple is healthy, but the other couple, the partner of the couple has significant needs. Well, that spouse wants to keep them at home. So, there's been a lot of positive things that I've seen over the years in terms of home care and what we can do keeping people at homes. And long-term care, one of the things that I'm recommending for the future for this committee is you get into strategic planning for long-term care, because it's like a 4-year cycle, it would appear, and it needs to go beyond that. But there's no reason that long-term care homes can't reach out and provide the care to those people struggling in the community. And it's happening, by the way, where long-term care homes have personal support workers, and instead of going to the emergency department when someone falls and can't get up, they call the long-term care home, middle of the night, they send out a personal support worker to help them. That's the direction it should be. It's not, what I'm saying is not that long-term care homes aren't needed. They very well are, and the city's providing a service that is essential. If the city ever decided to reduce because you can't afford it, the province would have a significant issue in the Ottawa area if the city got out of the business. So they should step up to the table and be partners with the city in looking at some funding issues. If you need more support for funding, I mentioned earlier, I'll leave that point be. Bottom line is, long-term care homes are no longer just homes. They're homes with a lot of care within them being provided. City's doing a good job for the most part. However, there are some areas you need to work on.
Thank you.
Merci, Conseiller Fleury. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was very comprehensive, and some very thoughtful advice was provided. I just want to ask and follow up on some of your observations about nursing and personal care hours. And instinctively, I would be tempted to suggest or to understand that there would be a correlation between staff time and the amount of time that a patient sees staff and patient outcomes. But I don't know if that's evidence-based. I mean, that would be my assumption. But I guess my question is, I know that there are a series of quality indicators that's used, I guess, by the Ontario Long-Term Home Association. And I'm curious how the 4 city-run facilities stacked up on those. So the question is, how do the 4 homes that you were looking at, how do they stack up against the rest of the field when it comes to the quality indicators that are part of the review of all Ontario long-term homes?
It's pretty difficult for me to answer that without the information in front of me. The city long-term care homes quality indicators are the same as other long-term care homes in Ontario, so that information is available. And it is, when you say evidence-based and outcome, staffing is an indicator, is one of the inputs that affects the outcome. Could I say what portion that is? No, I mentioned in the report that staffing is not the panacea. You have to deal with all of the other issues as well. But I know from experience that the staffing does affect the outcome of care. If you have personal support workers received more funding, have 16 minutes more of care a day, you can imagine how the corners they cut may be not as sharp, let's say. You know, right now, in order to provide the best care within the resources, staff are cutting corners. So 15, 16 more minutes of care for each resident each day, they cut corners less. What does that mean? Well, that means that, indicators, falls is the biggest indicator. And, in terms of how you're doing in falls, there's a couple of homes, I believe, if I recall the statistics, that are about the same as Ontario, and there are a few homes that are higher. So indicators don't mean that there's a problem, but it gives the council information you can ask the questions to assess and staff to respond and be accountable for that. What other things?
Sorry, let me interrupt because you've touched on something that I'm interested in. I mean, in order to understand what the baseline data is, I'm curious whether at the start of your work you looked at the baseline data, you looked at the quality indicators, percent restraints, percent falls, percent ulcers, percent antipsychotics, percent pain. I've got the list right here. So it would be useful to understand how the 4 homes in question compared to the rest of the province on those benchmarks so that we can understand, are we dealing with actually 4 homes that are doing very well vis-a-vis the provincial average, or are there problems to begin with? Because 1 or 2 incidents doesn't necessarily tell us how we're doing across the range of indicators. So my question is, I assume you looked at that, and how are we doing on those 4 homes right now in a 2018 benchmark?
Yeah. I certainly did look at the quality indicators, and in terms of the quality indicators are fall, the highest risk is falls. So as I mentioned to you already, you're doing a few homes, and again, it's an indicator. It doesn't mean there's a problem. I wasn't able to the mandate didn't allow me to drill down too far on that. But this is the information that should be coming to council so you can ask the questions, understand what's the home's policy related to falls, what approach, what are the reasons for the falls? If you have, for example, and this is where comparing is very difficult, and it's very difficult to answer your question. If you have more residents who have dementia in your home than another home, the likelihood is your fall statistics are going to be higher. So this is part of the discussion about the statistic, and I haven't drilled down to that level to have that discussion. That's what I'm suggesting you do with the...
Well, I can ask staff that afterwards, so that's fine. I'll move on to my second question, which is, I remember when previous reports have come before this committee that we talked a little bit about the differences in the time, the personal time in not-for-profit homes versus for-profit homes. And if memory serves, and I stand to be corrected, that on average, non-profit averages were considerably higher. So we had in certain cases different statistics for for-profit homes, and I don't remember what that delta was.
I can tell you the detail.
Okay, so if you answer that, then I'll tell you what my actual question is. Go ahead.
Generally, long-term care homes in general are around 3 hours of care a day right now, in general. The 2016 Ministry of Health Statistics, and they come from the staffing reports that are submitted by every long-term care home in Ontario. For the not-for-profit sector, it's about 3 hours, and for the for-profit sector, it's about 3.05. So there's slightly higher staffing on average in a for-profit home than a not-for-profit home, and the big driver of that is often salary, wage.
Right. And then in terms of their ratios, within that 3 hours between PSW and registered help, would they be similar across the two, from what you know?
Yes, and I have them right with me. I'm just going to find them. So the staffing ratios, I'm going from my memory here, and I'll find a page. For example, right now the City of Ottawa on a day shift would have one personal support worker for every 9 residents. In other homes, it's 1 for every 7 to 8 residents on day shift. On the evening shift, I believe, if I recall correctly, the City of Ottawa homes have 1 to 21, whereas other homes have 1 personal support worker for every 21 residents, whereas other homes may have a few less residents per personal support worker. Night shift is about the same.
Great, thank you. My third question is about your recommendation about the idea of the creation of a long-term care board of directors. And I think that's a very interesting idea. And I say that because I think you're right, and I think you were polite in saying it, but I don't know that we're equipped around this table to get into the details of essentially how to run a health services organization. I mean, I'm certainly not. I won't speak to my colleagues, but for that reason, I think the idea of having people around the table who act as a functional board with at least a skill set that could complement that kind of oversight is instinctively, in my mind, very sensible. I guess the one thing, however, that would remain if council were to act on your recommendation is the budgets and the staff advice on the budgets would still be coming from staff who are employees of the corporation, correct? You're not suggesting that there would be independent staff supporting this board, are you?
No. Yeah. No. It would be the director of long-term care, I would believe, would be your key resource, but there would be other resources, and I mean, obviously the general manager provides that higher level of oversight.
Right, yeah, and I guess the hope would be that through a combination of different skills, you would get people around that board who would be able to ask the right questions to get at
that's the point.
The essence. And in fairness to our staff, and one of the challenges with having a municipality run a long-term care facility is, of course, council has, over the last number of years, has instructed staff to come up with a draft budget that has certain financial restraints. And staff do their very best to come forward with recommendations as council directed them. But with that, of course, sometimes the risks associated with those are not obvious. They're not always obvious. And I remember in Budget 2017, some of the staff recommendations that came forward were actually closing some of those high-need beds that you spoke about. And here you are 18 months later saying we have to reconsider, opening or expanding the number of high-need beds. So, just to say that from my experience, you're right that it's a difficult job for staff because they're under restraints that we give them, and we're not always clear on what the risks associated with those are. So I simply wanted to say that I think this is something worth considering. And I think, a question that was clearly outside of the remit of your mandate is, are municipalities the right entities to be owning and operating health facilities? And I know that wasn't a question in your terms of reference, but I'm wondering, as a last question, whether you wanted to offer any thoughts on that.
Madam Chair, certainly I can offer my thoughts on that. Municipal city-run homes are an integral part of the long-term care system, and I see this as a responsibility that every city should seriously consider. Some have pulled out, definitely, but usually they pull out because it's a financial consideration, right? So, the cities have offered long-term care for decades, have an excellent reputation. It's been sullied a bit because of the last year in the coverage media. It's a complex issue, and it's also it's a hard field to work in. You have to love it. You have to have passion for it because it is difficult. But I do believe cities have a role, and I do believe the non-for-profit sector has a role. The not-for-profit sector has shrunk compared to the for-profit sector. And I'm not making a comparison of one to the other, but I think that it's healthy to have a balance of for-profit and not-for-profit, and the city are part of that balance.
That's interesting. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report today and your extensive review that took place over many months. Was it your decision today, or were you advised that you couldn't pre-release your report prior to today?
I had nothing to do with that. I provided my report, and that would be something we should direct to Janice as a question.
I'll follow up with staff in a few minutes. Will you acknowledge that the adequate amount of time per resident may be different than the provincial average?
So repeat it again.
Well, we have a provincial average that you've demonstrated for a number of staff, but an average is just an average.
Right.
I'm trying to find out is what is the right amount of time per resident that exists per classification?
The discussion in Ontario at this time is that there should be movement towards 4 hours of care a day. There are many provincial reports that have reviewed this. One approximately 8 to 10 years ago was called the Sharkey Report, and that was the first identification of the need to move towards 4 hours. So this has been being discussed for the last decade, and there has been some movement, but I believe, from my understanding, the provincial budget this year has more funds for long-term care. I want to get to that actually in part of the question. Been receiving about 2% per year. Now, the city has not increased its staffing. One of my recommendations will be whatever funding is received from the ministry, 1% be put aside for staffing and 1% for other cost of living allowance increases. It's not going to cover it, I don't think. Your costs are still going to go up, but I think there needs to be a balance there. It's all about balance. And what's been happening is that the city has been using the funds from the province to deal with its financial issues also.
Thank you. I think it's just important for this committee to be aware that, like I said, a provincial average is simply an average. And really what we should be looking at is what is the adequate and right amount of time per resident.
Right. I do want to point out also, when I speak about reducing that from 6 to 4 special care dementia areas, it's simply because the experience is the amount of care, the hours of care are higher. Not much, but they are higher in secure dementia areas. So of 8 comparators, we looked at comparators, and I spoke to comparators. We received their nursing information. 7 of the 8 comparators had higher staffing levels on their secure dementia units. So if you're going to be offering and you will continue to offer that, but you have to have the resources for that level of care or your risks start to increase significantly.
The ratio that you calculate, is it simply number of staff divided by residents gives us a ratio, or is this actual one-on-one time that a resident gets with a staff member?
Well, of course, it's an average, as you pointed out, so some residents require much more than the average, and some residents require less. So every care plan is very driven by the care needs of the resident, right? And this is why the care plan is such an important document. And so you can't say this resident needs this many minutes per day and this, it's not that, it needs to be more flexible than that. And, another thing, too, across Ontario, I'm going to go to the Ontario scene, physical functional decline units have less staffing, so because of the increase, the majority of residents have dementia, then less staffing goes to physical functional decline. Right. So it's a constant balancing act, and it will always be.
My final question is just about training that PSWs get. Did you analyze, I'm not sure if this is a college program, is a diploma program in colleges, but did you analyze that specific training that they get from A to Z, identify any shortcomings? You identified what is perhaps missing within the Ottawa model, within the industry itself, but is there anything before they become employed that they're missing that perhaps we can then communicate on?
Well, a 6 to 8 month course means they're missing quite a bit. To care for people with dementia needs ongoing education and ongoing support. The question is, repeat your question again, sorry.
I was just asking if, even prior to becoming employed, whether their training package that they received had any deficiencies.
I get it. Okay. So training for personal support workers is provided by many different organizations. Algonquin College was one I visited, but there are private organizations, and they must meet ministry standards. So there are standards set, and as long as their curriculum meets those standards, and I assume, I don't know the detail of it, there's a process to review that and so on. I think that there are private providers, colleges, a number of different situations. One of my recommendations is the city partner with one of these organizations and develop their own personal support worker certificate program to attract and recruit and then attract the best, attract the people that have compassion, that are suitable for this kind of care.
Great. Again, thank you for your review and your report today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Chiarelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, I have a few questions from basically all over the map of today, but I do want to say thank you for the report. It's very logical and factual, and it's not argumentative. So I think it's a big help to us. On the board, you're recommending a combination of members of this committee and members of the public, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're specifically recommending that we have people who are subject matter experts?
Yes, in part, yes.
Okay.
That may not only be in long-term care.
Yeah.
Quality in broader sense is quality and risk could be a long-term care person, quality and risk, and some other, I'm not going to outline all of them, but yes.
Okay, because I know that when we set up a subject matter board before, it turned out that everyone we appointed was a lawyer. Okay. Now I know Mr. O'Connor sees nothing wrong with that, and Councillor Caudry assured me that the reason for that is that anyone who's been through law school thinks they know everything. But will you be able to make a strong kind of emphasis to council that that's what we have to be looking for in citizen members?
Yes, and I think that exactly the point I'm making is you need to discuss what skill set you need on that board in order for them to bring forward to this committee, because they will not have any power. They will not have any other than bringing forward recommendations as a committee and then bring forward to council. So I think this committee has control of that.
Okay. Now at budget time, we were dealing with last year's actual spending and budgeted spending of last year. And it looked to some of us as if the budget was underrepresenting the need we were going to have this year. So I'm perfectly willing to make the changes we need to make in our spending to make these improvements and fixes to the system. But I do have to point out that last year we actually spent more than we budgeted for in long-term care. And could you just outline some of the things we spent that extra money on?
So the two areas the one area I looked at the most was nursing and personal care. And out of the $14.5 million additional funding, $13 million is nursing and personal care. So based on that, my assumption is that as situations arose where there was a need to add staff for urgent situations or whatever, that's what's driving your overage. I can't say that specifically, but knowing that 13 of $14.5 million is for nursing, I also know at one home, the home where the design issues exist in the secure dementia area, I do know that there was added staff at the time that I went into the homes to deal with some of the urgent situation in that floor. So I suspect that's, staff would have to answer you, but just knowing that $13 million is nursing personal care, that's your overage.
Yeah, so it would be logical then to assume that we're going to need at least that much in the next year, which is what you're actually saying we do need. Actually, you're saying we need a bit more than that at 2.9.
Right.
Right. Okay, so I don't want to say I told you so, but instead I'll say let me remind you that a number of us at budget time pointed out that the budget did underrepresent what we were going to need to fix this problem. And I think all the people who voted against that budget are at this table today. And I think we made a pretty accurate description of what we were going to need. The question of volunteers. I've noticed, and there have been a couple of studies showing that people in their 20s now are far less likely to volunteer for things than previous generations of people in their 20s. On the flip side, people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s are more likely to volunteer. So have you contemplated how to, and I'm talking about in career-oriented types of functions. Mm-hmm. Have you put your mind to how we would do that targeting so that we could make it happen, even though some of the volunteer pool is drying up?
One of the things I need to point out, decrease in long-term care hours is just an indicator. Again, it doesn't mean the program has necessarily diminished. I mean, it's a trigger to look at it further, and a full study of it was not part of my mandate. Mm-hmm. However, hours are not necessarily, some of the indicators are different than hours. They aren't necessarily the best indicators, but I think that what I've seen, certainly in terms of the placement from schools into long-term care homes, there is a large group of young people that are still interested, even though your statistics would suggest it's not as much. There is a large pool of young people involved in long-term care, and so that's an area that I think there's still some recruitment possibility. In terms of the 50, 60-year-olds, you're into my age range, and there's a lot of people out there with a lot of time, interest, and skills that are willing to volunteer. They just need to be directed as to where the need is.
Okay. And just on the issue of budgeting again, as a city, if we end up making cuts anywhere, we try not to cut frontline services. And there's nothing or very few things as frontline as dealing directly with patients in long-term care facilities. So really, it's a choice of whether you're funding it or not here, because would you agree there aren't enough administrators that you could cut them all and you're not going to solve anything?
So repeat your question again.
Well, the saving, if you're looking for savings, it's going to have to pay for this increase. It's going to have to be in other parts of the city operation, not in the long-term care area. Is that right?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
The long-term care home budget has 3 components, and the province funds the nursing and personal care and the program support. The one area that the city or any long-term care home can take money and move up to the other envelopes, is if there's a need, is what's called the accommodation envelope. So that's all the administrative services, human resources, housekeeping, laundry, food and nutrition, those type of services. Currently, the administrators aren't responsible for that budget, and normally there is money that you can find in that budget to fund some of your other pressures. So that's one of the recommendations I've made to take a look at, why you're not generating a surplus there. That's where for-profit homes, part of where for-profit homes take profit. And that's where non-profit homes take that money with it they can, their surplus, and apply it to other areas of need. So there is some flexibility there. And the other side of the coin is not necessarily reducing costs, it's the area of revenues. Currently, you charge preferred accommodation revenues for semi-private and private rooms. I don't recall the actual number, but it's significant. What happens with preferred accommodation revenues is homes use that for profit, for equipment, or for staff. So it's another area. The high wage transition fund, you receive a small amount for your additional high wage, but you don't receive a sufficient amount. So I think there's dialogue with the ministry on something like that. So I think it's both the cost side and the revenue side.
Okay. So we can get some of it from within this sector.
You can? Yeah, I would suspect, but I did not study in detail the accommodation funding envelope.
Okay. So that would be a separate budget time exercise, I guess. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shmurley. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. Just had a quick question in terms of the recommendations that's before us, and in your presentation you spoke about obviously having the right quality people and right individuals with the skill set, with the attitude, the communication skills, all those things that you listed. And when I look at the recommendation before us today about hiring the FTEs, obviously you pointed out to the ratio issue as well between PSWs and the residents in the homes. But is there a benefit as well to perhaps providing some funding towards training instead of hiring them? Because what I see before us is we're throwing bodies at the problem. And you alluded to in your presentation some bigger issues in terms of finding the right people as well. So is there a benefit to perhaps rewording or changing that to also set aside some of that money towards reteaching, if you will, or coaching some of the people that are there, or different things to do with that money? Because I see that as also part of the problem as well.
I did not review in detail the education budget, so I can't speak to that fully, but I do know generally education budgets are the place where outside of the city that you start to look at, can I take some of that money for something else? That being said, I do believe there's a lot of education provided in the city. It's a question of providing more and the continual support, and especially a focus on dementia. I think the biggest issue in front of the council is, and in front of long-term care homes, is how you're going to evolve the programs you provide service to people with dementia. Because it's the elephant in the room.
And, I've been to the Carlton Lodge in my area, and I know we have a great team of people there. And, we were fortunate that there was very few or limited or zero incidents in that home. And I've seen what you ended your presentation on in terms of the great service that most residents receive on a day-to-day basis. And so I just want to make sure if we're going to be spending this money, we do it in a way that's effective. And based on your presentation and your report here, obviously a big component is the FTEs, but I think there's more to it than that. And I'll ask that staff, but I was interested because you had a thorough, examination and interviews that you spent doing on this, if you feel that there might be more benefit of dividing the funds in a different way.
Yes, I didn't get that specific about education. I mean, obviously I've mentioned education. One thing that in your comments that I'd like to raise, though, is and Carlton Lodge has excellent care, definitely, but I still heard issues. People can say that there's good care or excellent care, but they can be really, really nervous about the potential for incidents, let me use that word, especially in the area of dementia care and resident-to-resident abuse. I mean, it's not the resident's fault, but it's a symptom, it's a behavior that's a result of their dementia. Yes, Carlton Lodge has excellent care and excellent services, but as with the other homes, I heard from families, and I heard from residents also about issues like staff attitude, equally at Carlton Lodge. So I think the important thing here is that the good thing is that the City of Ottawa has an excellent history of good reputation. And I think that hopefully, well, in fact, I know from a lot of families that they've acknowledged that, but they still have concerns.
And so those infrastructure issues in the homes are all the homes are outdated, all of them could be redone. In those cases, I mean, what are other municipalities doing? Are we demolishing and building new ones, or are they retrofitting what's there to deal with the issues of internal incidents that may happen between residents?
So again, ask the question.
So you were talking about how the infrastructure of these buildings, of these facilities is outdated,
yeah.
and in new builds, they would be done differently to avoid any kind of incidents between residents, correct? Is that what you were saying?
Well, I didn't say the latter. It's very hard to say you avoid any incidents.
Sorry, not prevent, but it would lower, I guess, the number of incidents that perhaps would happen.
Yes.
And so can that be done with a facility, say, like the Carlton Lodge, where you would change the layout of it, or are we talking about new builds and completely different?
I did. That was not part of my mandate at all, so I didn't talk about builds or construction or anything like that. Of the 4 homes, I believe there are some homes that could have changes to their design with the approval of a budget. Other homes, it's going to be very, very difficult to change some of the design. Carlton Lodge, for example, there is a very, very large dining area for residents, and it's super, and it works well. As more and more people have dementia, and at Carlton Lodge, 87% of residents have dementia. That is going to be more and more difficult to provide care. You know, people in a dining room that have dementia, they're getting up, they're walking over, they're taking something. You know, there's a lot of things that have to be managed. So that kind of design would have to be looked at. Because it's an open space, probably can be retrofitted. On the residential home areas of Carlton Lodge, the dining rooms are very small. So for the physical functional decline units, where there's a lot of very large pieces of equipment, the people, mobility equipment and so on, there are challenges to provide good dining for a physical functional decline in those small dining rooms. That also could be, there are other spaces that possibly could be, switched for dining, and there's a cost to all of it. I think some can be done and some would be too expensive, and probably you'd have to look at whether you're going to rebuild. Okay. But that's not, I don't think that's not the mandate, and that's not, I think, an item that you have to concern yourself about today.
No, I appreciate that, and I know that was outside of your scope, but since we have you here, I thought I'd get your thoughts on that as well. So thank you for the presentation, and thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kakish. Councillor Tarus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very good presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Fougere. But when you compare our city facilities operating on the long term, have you compared them with private and non-profit and non-profit, or you just did the review based on the needs of the home?
During the first, for the staffing issues, it was compared to the whole province, and it was 2016 Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care data. So that's where that comes from. We completed a survey of 8 comparator homes. We established some criteria for those comparator homes, like size, and so on. And there were comparator homes in Ottawa, and there were comparator homes in other parts of Ontario in that. So we used that data, and what that actually showed was the staffing levels are about what they were in 2016. It led me to believe that there hasn't been a lot of movement in the province of Ontario between 2016 and 2017. So I think if you level the playing field and bring your staffing up to the level, you're then where other long-term care homes are, and hopefully, and I think the light is being shone on this issue, that long-term care will start to move to the 4 hours of care a day.
Thank you. In your review, did you added a review of the managerial overhead, or it was just totally on the service side of it, PWS?
I did not review the managerial overhead, but from intuitively the management structure, I can't imagine that it's any different than a lot of similar structures. It's in line.
Okay. In comparing to our regular or non-profit, our managerial, so you think we have also the same, we have similar staffing at the same level?
As other non-for-profit homes? Yes, pretty well, I would say. I mean, you have to adjust by size and a number of different factors, but I would say pretty well.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Therese. Are there any other questions for Mr. Fougere? Seeing none, Mr. Fougere, just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you again. You've painted, I think, for all of us a very vivid picture of the challenges that we face in our long-term care homes, addressing the complex needs of our most vulnerable citizens. And I think you have given us a lot of great advice on a path forward to make sure that we have continuous improvement. So we are grateful for all of your hard work over the last 6 months. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Burrell, you wanted to, I think, respond at this point, so over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I pointed out earlier, there was 2 documents that you had received. One was the slide deck from Mr. Fougere, as well as the transmittal report. So at this point, we just have a handful of slides that we would like to walk through with committee to provide some context. So just in terms of the last, so I have double duty here. Okay. So just to run through what's transpired in the last 11 months. So in the spring, thanks. Okay, thank you. In the spring, Council was apprised that an incident had occurred in one of the homes, and we outlined all the steps that we were undertaking at the time. In July of 2017, we received a director's order related to 3 homes. So that led to the development of 5 very comprehensive plans, and we began implementation immediately on some of those actions. That update was provided to stakeholders and councillors, along with all of the compliance plans. The majority of those actions were all completed by between September and December 2017. And following that work, the ministry completed its inspections and found that we were back in compliance by the end of January 2018. Then in 2017, we rolled out a very broad stakeholder engagement session and surveys. Over 956 people, comprised of residents, families, volunteers, and staff, either attended in-person sessions or completed a survey. And if you recall, in September of last year, we also came to CPS and provided an extensive, comprehensive 44-slide presentation on long-term care. As a result of an incident of verbal abuse at the home in the fall of 2017, the mayor requested that third-party review. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been working closely with Mr. Fougere since that time. So, and by January, we had reviewed all of the feedback that we had received from the stakeholder engagements. We developed a comprehensive work plan. Once again, we communicated with council as well as all of stakeholders in terms of what the work plan was going forward. And then the last 2 are the fact that we have the Auditor General, who tabled 2 audits this morning that totaled 28 recommendations from those 2 reviews. So what we decided to do was consolidate them into one comprehensive work plan, and at the back of your transmittal report, you have that work plan. So I have highlighted the various sources and reviews of feedback to reassure committee and stakeholders that we are actively listening and we are responding to all the concerns that have been raised. We commit to completing all the actions that have been noted to date. We also commit to a culture of continuous improvement and communication. Given the multiple sources and recommendations, as we said, we've consolidated them into one work plan. So now, at this point, we have 84 items in that consolidated work plan, 18 of which are complete, 21%, and 43 are in progress for a total of 41%. And we've broken them down into 5 categories: staffing, quality improvement, infrastructure, communication, resident care, and service delivery. So at this point, I'll just ask Dean to highlight some of the actions that have been completed.
Thank you, Janice. Madam Chair, in terms of staffing, we are going to continue the in-person training related face-to-face around abuse and the prevention of abuse in the homes. We're also in June going to be doing a abuse awareness week in all of the homes, which will include education for our staff, families and residents and volunteers. We have developed tools around the culturally diverse background of our residents, and those are up and running and being used. Things like picture boards, where a resident who may not be able to communicate can still point to the picture board when they're asking for specific care or services. The dementia training that was highlighted in Greg's report around staff and around education of families, we're going to be training 4 staff members on gentle persuasive approach who will be certified and able to do education for our staff as well as our families. In terms of the on-call manager that was highlighted this morning in the audit report, we are developing training for our managers on intake of incidents that occur in the homes to ensure that we have the proper information to meet the legislative requirement around reporting. As Greg has highlighted, we are going to prepare, look at our staffing ratios and identify the best use of any new positions that are developed to ensure the safety and care of our residents. We are also developing new tools around the screening of staff for suitability and language skills. That will include written testing on the interview as well as oral communications. In terms of employee recognition, we understand, and you heard clearly today, that our staff have been through a very rough ride the last little while, and we're looking at opportunities through consultation with staff on how we recognize them for the work they do, and also how families and residents can be recognizing staff. In addition to that, we're going to develop a peer support network to help staff in the workplace, and also to look at education around mental health and supporting our staff in the homes. In terms of quality improvement, as we heard earlier today as well, there'll be an extensive review of our medication practices across the homes. The 17 audit recommendations around medication will be implemented as part of our quality improvement. We're also looking at our complaints process to identify best practices around complaints. There is a feeling of fear of retaliation if people come forward in relation to complaints, and we're looking at how we can strengthen that and establish best practices to promote using complaints around driving quality and improvements in the workplace. And as Greg mentioned earlier, the Board of Directors, this will be a proposal that will come to Council for consideration with a recommendation of increasing our governance within the homes. Around infrastructure, we are going to be putting in a new resident care information system in the 4th quarter of this year, and a second phase of that in second quarter of 2019. We're going to implement an electronic medication administration record, which will also help to identify and address the recommendations from the audit. We're in the process of updating our 10-year capital plan, and as you heard, there's an ask for $1 million to go into capital, and that capital will primarily be used to purchase beds, therapeutic tubs, and lifts, as well as to support the implementation of the IT plan. In terms of communication, we heard loud and clear through the stakeholder engagement sessions on how we can be improving our communications. We've developed an extensive communication plan for all stakeholders, and that is in the process of being rolled out. We, as well, you heard earlier today as well about a shift-to-shift report. We're in the process of developing a standardized template to follow on shift exchange to ensure that staff are provided with the appropriate information in order to support the residents' care and services. And the final area, resident care and service delivery. Greg talked today around volunteerism and the importance of recruitment of volunteers. Volunteer recruitment is and always will be one of our primary objectives in long-term care. Volunteers enhance the quality of life for our residents, either through programmings or assistance with the activities of daily living. We currently have over 600 volunteers in our homes. These volunteers help to support programs such as Montessori, and we also have been implementing in one of the homes, which will be rolled out across, a music memory program. And again, that was highlighted in Greg's presentation. As well, in our recreation program this year, we have an objective to introduce 10 new culturally diverse programs in each one of the homes. In addition to this, with the compliance plans, we developed a new policy and procedure around the development of care plans, which included a posting of a Cardex in the room for the residents for easy access for staff to be able to refer to when providing care.
Thank you, Dean. I just wanted to take an opportunity, like yourselves, to thank Greg for his expertise. His review was comprehensive and thorough. The information he provided was invaluable. It included interviews, observations, research, and comparators. And we did hear from staff and families and residents that they absolutely appreciated the opportunity to speak with him confidentially and privately. I think the overview of the information we provided this afternoon demonstrates that there has been intensive work that has been underway since last summer, and that a lot of feedback has been provided from these different sources, and we've been confident that that feedback will be going forward and making changes as necessary. One thing that we heard unanimously is the need to increase staffing levels, and so we absolutely welcome the motion this morning, and we're also conscious of the need that we have to look at our hiring practices as well and orientation, but this will go a long way, as well as the report that will be going to FEDCO tomorrow for the $1 million for new equipment. We also want to point out that there was a recent announcements by the provincial government for additional funding that will come forward, so we'll absolutely leverage that funding in addition. At this point, we have come a long way in terms of fully understanding and appreciating the needs and profiles of our residents. We have very much evolved from what was assisted living to care for residents living with both dementia and increasing more complex medical needs, as outlined by Greg and our presentation to you in September. We therefore need progressive transformative change, which is imperative to reducing the risk to our residents. Our job is to support our staff, provide them with the necessary tools, accountabilities, resources, and training to ensure that we provide care and services that residents deserve and families expect. I want to thank everyone for providing critical feedback and completing reviews for our homes. I want to acknowledge staff in this department and corporately who continue to work tirelessly to make the necessary changes. It has been a stressful time. Staff have been under a microscope, as Steve Kanalakis mentioned earlier today. We had 3 sets of reviews happening in January at one time, and some assumptions have been attributed to all staff. So given the positive feedback overall, though, that residents feel safe and cared for, we will build on what we are doing well. So at the very core of all of the reviews and the staff responses is the desire to provide safe, secure, and nurturing environment for all of our 717 residents. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burrell and your team for your response. We have a number of questions, starting with Councillor Egley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. I want to go back to the question of a separate committee or board. And I just want to confirm that this is something that, by approving this report today, what we're simply doing is we're sending it off to the governance process for discussion and review, because it seems to me, and I don't want to put Councillor Qadri on the spot here, but it seems to me that we have a valuable role model in the Public Health Board in terms of bringing together elected officials as well as subject matter specialists, and not lawyers, but doctors, nurses, healthcare workers. So I'm not suggesting that's something that he adds to his workload of his board, and I'm sure he's happy to hear that. But I think it's worthy of a discussion to look at that model, see how it functions, and have a deeper dive into that issue. So I'm just looking for confirmation that we are, by approving this or accepting this report, we're moving that discussion over into the governance piece, into the clerk's office for further discussion and review to be put forward at the beginning of next term.
Absolutely, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The other piece I want to talk about is the dollars. So you've given us a figure of what you need to get through to the end of this year, and you've also given us a figure as to what you need going forward. And it's not an inconsequential number. And we've heard both from the consultant and from yourselves that there is a role for the city to play in the provision of this service, but there's also a role for the province to play. And Janice, you said not even 5 minutes ago that there's an opportunity for more funding out of the province. So as part of what we're doing here today, does it help if direction was given, for example, for the chair and the mayor, perhaps they've done a motion, which I think is going to be well received, but for the mayor and the chair also to send a written request to the ministry and say, this is an issue that we're dealing with in the city, and we're taking it seriously, we're taking these steps, and we're looking for the province to also jump in and do what they can in terms of additional funding. And I'm looking at the chair, she's nodding her head. So if you would take that as direction and just to bolster our position and make it clear that in the city we're concerned about this, we want to fix it, but we're looking to our partners to do that. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Egla. I think that's a good suggestion. Councillor Nuspa.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the questions that I raised with Mr. Fougere earlier. And the first is, and apologies for not recalling these numbers from the November presentation, but I am interested in understanding, in terms of the baseline data, how our 4 city-run facilities are doing vis-a-vis the quality indicators that I set out earlier. Where do we sit on those indicators currently?
Madam Chair, as of the third quarter of 2017, the numbers we receive are sort of outdated. They're 90 days in abeyance. So there's the number of publicly reported indicators that are out there. One is around improve to remain independent at mid-loss, and our homes are slightly below the provincial number at 29.7. Worsen to remain dependent in early loss ADL, we're performing better than the provincial number at 34.7. Worsened mood and symptoms of depression, we're performing better than the provincial average at 23.4. Antipsychotics without a diagnosis, the provincial number is at 19.7, and 3 of our 4 homes are below the provincial average, and 1 of them is at 19.9, which is pretty much at the provincial average. Falls, the provincial average is 16.3. 3 of our homes are below the number for falls, and 1 is slightly above at 17.1. Daily physical restraints, the provincial number is 4.6. Our homes are around 10%, so we have some room to improve in relation to physical restraints. In terms of pain, the provincial number is 5.4. 3 of our homes are below the provincial average, and 1 is higher at 6.6%. Worsened pain, the average is 10. 2 of our homes are below 10. 1 is at 10.2 and 1 is at 10.7. So we're close to the provincial number on those. The other one is around pressure ulcers. The provincial number is 2.7. 2 of our homes are below. 2 are higher, 1 at 3.3 and 1 at 4%. So overall, our homes are performing pretty close to the provincial average on the public indicators.
Thank you. And the reason I asked that question in part is twofold. One is, as I said earlier, higher staffing is intuitively a good thing, but it's not an indicator. My assumption is with higher staffing, the expectation is your quality outcomes are better. Is that a fair way of interpreting the benefit of staffing as you get on your quality indicators better outcomes, correct?
Madam Chair, we would anticipate through our quality improvement plans that we would see improvements in the areas, especially around assessing in advance, around safety for residents by having more staff, more awareness to watch for indicators of responsive behaviors.
Great. And again, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I certainly support the idea of budgeting more money for long-term care. I do think, though, the question needs to be posed, and this is a great example of something that I don't know the answer, so I'm going to pose it to you, and I hope you know the answer, is if you look at the overall effectiveness and efficacy of our long-term care system, is putting $2.2 million into staffing, do we have confidence that that's the right way to spend the money? I mean, that's the recommendation of our third-party evaluator, but in fairness, he was looking at a particular aspect of that system. And again, I'm not asking the question because I oppose it. On the contrary, what I'm wondering is staff confident that $2.2 million added to the budget each year is best spent on the suggestion by our third-party evaluator, or given that we have a LHIN wait list of 3,200 people as of last year, does it make more sense in terms of overall health outcomes in the City of Ottawa to use that money to increase the number of long-term beds? I mean, just as an example, I don't know the answer. I'm asking that because I think it's important that you give us advice on whether you think $2.2 million added to your budget, how can that best be used to improve overall health outcomes for residents in our city.
Madam Chair, consistently we heard that the number one issue was having additional personal support workers so that there's less rushing, more availability, more responsiveness to call bells, less chances of neglect in terms of providing service in a timely way. And we are below the provincial average. So personally, I think this is the best investment. Of course, we will continue to review all of the other recommendations and look at other options to improve our outcomes, and we will bring those forward as part of the 2019 budget.
So I guess a follow-up question to that, thank you for that answer, is the third-party review also recommended some investment, let's call them in more quasi-management or quality oversight jobs. And from what I understood from the Chair's motion, there's no suggestion that we spend money on those 5 positions for the time being in the 2018 budget year. Again, is staff comfortable with the idea of saying yes to 35 PSWs, but no to a quality and risk manager, no to a nursing practice manager, no to an HR management, no to admission coordinators, and no to staff development at the resources within that $2.2 million envelope?
So we do have a request into the LHIN for a nurse practitioner. So again, we're going back to leveraging all different sources of revenue. We also have had conversations with Donna Gray and her team around HR and labor relations, as well as organizational development. We have also been looking at some of the functions that Mr. Fougere outlined in terms of our social work and so forth, to look at their roles and responsibilities and removing some of the administration so that they can concentrate on some of those tasks. So we will take those away and look at other sources and mechanisms and processes to get that expertise. And again, if we feel that there's a pressure, we will bring it back in 2019.
I guess the question that I'm wondering, Chair, is would it be helpful in terms of giving staff flexibility to conduct the hiring in a way, I mean, this has all happened relatively quickly. I mean, we got this report an hour ago. And your motion was read out half an hour ago. And so while I'm prepared to vote on it today, I'm just wondering if it wouldn't make sense to say, okay, we're going to put $2.2 million into this, $800,000 in this fiscal year, but can we not give staff flexibility? Let's say it makes more sense to hire 30 PSWs and take the money from the between 30 and 35 and hire a nursing practice manager. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I wouldn't want to tie staff's hands if they felt that, upon looking at this over the coming weeks, it made more sense to construct this slightly differently. So I think that's a friendly amendment. I'm looking to staff to see, again, I want to make sure that we're giving you the tools to take these recommendations and the additional resources and apply them in a way that you think is most effective, because we can't make that choice for you. So if you think there's a small possibility that you would want to see a little bit of flexibility in how that money is spent, then I think our motion should give that.
Since it's my motion, I don't think there's any doubt that we need to hire all 35 PSWs. I think that's pretty clear that we're understaffed. It's 18 minutes of personal care per person in all 4 of our homes. But what the motion does say is also that we are delegating authority to the general manager on the other $1 million that will be moved at FedCo tomorrow, in order to give the general manager flexibility to use that money. So if we need more registered nurses, for example, the general manager will have the flexibility to use some of that $1 million in order to fulfill that need.
But just on that, I mean, are we even confident that there are 35 trained PSW applicants who we know we could hire in this fiscal year, again, to satisfy the $800,000 that we're allocating? I mean, it strikes me, given that training and education was actually one of the issues we heard about, I don't know enough about the labor pool to know whether it's going to be easy to hire 35 quality PSWs in the short time that we're giving staff. So you may be right, Chair, that the need is there, and I'm not arguing that, but it would strike me as being unfortunate if we couldn't hire 35, if we weren't able to let staff take other steps to respond to the recommendations, including the idea of having some oversight FTEs as well.
I'm prepared to let that stand as a direction, that the general manager can have some flexibility, but I can tell you that we have discussed this, and the $800,000 is only a part-year effect, because we recognize there's training and staffing that will take some time, so it's not the full-year impact. So, but staff seem to be confident that they would be able to hire the 35 in a timely fashion. Okay? Okay, thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Councillor Brockington.
What if the motion said we would like to direct staff to, if they had up to $800,000, come back to this committee in a month and tell us how you would allocate that $800,000? Because the chair has made that decision through her motion. And prior to 2 hours ago, we weren't privy to what those recommendations would be. So no one is doubting the need for more PSWs, but I'm not confident that it all should go into that pot. And so either today you are just so firm in your confidence that this is how that $800,000 should be allocated, or we potentially put a different motion on the floor that says, think about this over the next month, and the intent is to allocate $800,000. You tell us how you need to spend that $800,000. I think you should be bringing that direction to us. So the councillors identify the money, and you give us the crystal clear direction that you think we should be going. So what would your reaction be to that direction?
Madam Chair, we do have a number of PSWs right now that work part-time. There are approximately 22 of them. So we certainly can move from them being part-time to going full-time, recognizing that we do have to look at our hiring practices, and that could be done fairly quickly. Then there would be an external competition that would be needed. We will look at any of these other recommendations in terms of moving forward if we think they are a priority. So one example is Mr. Fougere identified the need for 5 other registered personnel. In the budget from the province, they did identify 1 new nurse per home. So there is a lot of moving parts, absolutely. We will put forward the best solution going forward, but having participated in many of the sessions with families and residents and staff, as well as consistently, and we also heard from the Auditor General this morning that the need for personal support workers is great. If it is the direction of a committee for us to come back next month and put our recommendations forward, we can certainly do that as well, but we would like to get started immediately.
I'm putting it to you because if you feel that the best direction to go in this regard is the motion that's on the floor now, then I will take your advice on that matter. But I think there is some utility in taking a breath. That the report is extensive. There's been 0 public consultation. There's been no pre-release of this report. We may hear some positive things from our community who would like to provide some input before this committee and council makes a decision. And so that's why I'm looking to you. I'm looking to you with that question. Let me just let you think about that, and I'm going to move on with some other questions. So I had asked when Mr. Fougere provided his report why this wasn't pre-released. Can you let me know?
Madam Chair, the practice of the city is that all independent reviews come to committee before they go public, so we followed that same process today.
And I see the city clerk here. Is practice policy, or is practice just how we've just always done it?
Practice is the latter, Mr. Chair, or Madam Chair.
How we've always done it. I just want to say that for something as important as this that has got such public attention and scrutiny over such a long time period, that there would have been great value to pre-release this report. I had a delegation of constituents in my office on Friday of last week wanting to know when they could see the report, who were unable to be here today, who wanted to provide me with some comments in advance. And I see a lot of staff in the gallery today and not a lot of members of the public. So I just wanted to state my concern with that. My question to Mr. Fougere was about the difference between a provincial average and what Ottawa needs. What Ottawa's needs are. The needs of residents differ from municipality just based on their own personal needs. But I want to make sure that we are providing the best possible care that we can, and I don't want us to get hung up on a number, a provincial average. We had extensive conversation at this committee, and I don't know whether it was part of the budget process or part of a reaction to another report, where we continuously asked you if Ottawa's score below the provincial average needed to be addressed. And we were basically assured that even though you acknowledged we were below the provincial average, we could still make do. We could still provide quality care to our residents. You talked about some of the factors that play, but basically you gave this committee assurances that we were still providing quality care and that we were still getting along well. And yet today you say you welcome the recommendations. So I'm troubled that there was talk prior to the 2018 budget that at least contemplated or at least talked about the concerns about the City of Ottawa scoring below the provincial average, and some members were contemplating allocating additional resources, but we were basically assured and reassured that the quality of care was satisfactory. You talked about some of your preliminary conversations with family members, and yes, that there were some perhaps outlier issues, but that we were getting by. I'm just finding it hard today to hear senior staff say we recognize and acknowledge the recommendations before us when we were having very similar conversations at least 6 months ago, and we, the committee and council, didn't act to put resources in when they were needed at that time. Can I just ask if there will be any pressure to increase the fees that are charged residents who stay in our long-term care homes? There's talk today about using reserve funds to offset the additional costs to add staff, but I'm sure questions from the public will be if the city is going to incur additional costs, whether there'll be any upward pressure on fees charged to residents.
So, Madam Chair, the co-payments established in long-term care are set by the province, and they're fixed across the province. Currently, today, a resident living in a basic room pays $1,820, and a resident living in a private room pays $2,600.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess my last line of questioning are about the PSWs who really do fine work, and I want to acknowledge the vast majority, just like in every other industry really, are people who care about the residents in our homes and are there for the right reasons. But certainly, as Mr. Fogel indicated, there are perhaps people who maybe this isn't their calling. How do you review the performance of, I don't want to just focus on PSWs, but staff who work in homes on a, let's say, annual basis? How do you identify shortcomings in their skill set, and how do you identify improvements? I want to make sure that something's in place before these recommendations come out, but ultimately the goal should be how do we get the best staff, best trained staff, identify gaps, and give them the training that they need?
So, Madam Chair, our recruitment process, as I mentioned earlier today, is going to change in terms of the tools that we're going to be using for screening people in. Staff, we have individual developmental plans for staff. That's to help them grow and be trained in certain areas. And if an employee is unable, after being provided the training, to be able to deliver the care and services accordingly, then we would look at going a different direction around performance management with that particular individual, up to and including discipline, which could result in the termination of the employee for unsuitability in the position.
Thank you for that. Madam Chair, I'm going to end my questioning, but I was wondering if I could ask the clerk's office to draft some wording for me to consider regarding my first line of question, and that would be for this committee to direct staff over the next month before the intent would be to come back to the next CPS meeting to identify a plan on how they would allocate the $800,000 that's been identified in Councillor Dean's motion, but the intent would be to allow staff to come back and report to this committee their plan to allocate those funds. So that's just general wording, but
I suppose you can ask the clerk to draft that for you and we can put it before the committee, but from my part, very comfortable with the motion that the mayor and I worked on over the weekend and we put forward here today. I can tell you that there has been 6 months of extensive consultation with the families and with the residents in the home and the recommendations. We've worked with city staff on these recommendations. I feel very confident in saying that everyone's in agreement that we need to get on with hiring these personal support workers now. So I don't think that there's a reason to complicate it by bringing it back. I think what we really have to do is get on with hiring more staff in these homes.
Let me just ask, is this the best recommendation before us? Because I caught some hesitancy when I asked. If you believe this is the right way to go, you don't need a month to come back to us and clearly indicate how you'd like to allocate those $800,000, then I'll accept the Dean's motion. But I think that, Councillor Dean's had the privy of advance notification of the report. I didn't. and we're being asked to basically think about how to spend $2.3 million annualized. If you say this is the best direction, then I'm not going to proceed with any other motion, because I'm looking for your advice.
Madam Chair, I apologize if I was hesitant. That was not my intent. Unanimously, we heard that more personal support workers is the priority. What I was saying is potentially if we cannot hire sufficient personal support workers between now and the end of the year, because we want to hire the right people, we want to look at our hiring practices, we want to look at language, attitude, suitability, all those things are important. We want to hire the right people. So if there's other folks that we can hire that will support some of this other change, then we will do that and then come forward in 2019 with the full 35 FTEs for personal support worker if we cannot find enough people between now and the end of the year.
I appreciate that clarification, and I do support that direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In the meantime, Councillor Nussbaum has given me a suggestion for a friendly amendment, which I'm going to accept as friendly. So the resolution will now say, therefore be it resolved that Community and Protective Services Committee recommend that City Council approve that 35 new additional FTEs in long-term care services for personal support workers or other new positions as the general manager determines are necessary, and then the rest of the motion. So we're giving you a little added flexibility. Okay. Councillor Druce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is I'm very happy with the new language in the motion, because I really don't want to. I didn't want to not support the motion, because we all know that we need extra PWS, and I totally agree. And if you ask anybody in the city, we need those personnel to help our residents and our people in our long term. But my problem is the review didn't look at the big picture. We didn't look at the managerial. Like, we have so many management, and I like to see in the next report or before for next year when you do a review, you need to also look at your management expenses, because if you want to find a saving or efficiency, it's not always on the frontline worker. We always know that we need more people to serve the resident. But I'm not sure in our practice and the practice that our long-term facilities are equivalent to non-profit or any other facility, because I know from a personal experience, I sit on another long-term and I know our management level, and I see the deficiency, and I see we're getting so many layers. You have manager for everything almost. So I mean, are we really looking at the picture only on the lower level? We're not looking into the management expense, and that's concern me. And I like, in the next review, I like to ask a recommendation, if the chair will allow, that we need to review those expenses and those management layer of management we have, and see if we find deficiencies so we can hire more PWS. And that's where I really look at for our residents, because you have too many soldiers, you have too many chiefs, you don't have enough soldiers. And that's the way I look at it into our practices. So I will be supporting the motion and making sure in the next review we will review our structure and how many management we have, and we compare them to another non-profit facilities.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Druce. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair. In your presentation, you have a section about training, preventive abuse, dementia, on-call abuse awareness, and all that. So are you doing this for the new staff or the existing staff, and where are you getting the funding to do this from?
Madam Chair, the training on abuse is a legislated annual mandatory training for all staff. All new staff, when they're going through general orientation, that training is provided in person. And as a result of the plans we put forward to the ministry last year, all of our abuse training now is done in person with our staff. We're using scenarios around abuse and neglect so staff have a better understanding of what that looks like, but it's done every year with all of our staff.
And as opposed to before, was it not done in person?
Exactly. In the past, we have a software called Surge Learning, and a lot of the training modules were done online. Because of the priority around the safety of our residents and staff's ability to distinguish between what abuse and neglect look like, we wanted to do in-class sessions so they could have a discussion as a group and have a better understanding of both the definition, the duty to report, and our duty to protect our residents.
Okay. Because one of my questions is with regards to, obviously there's a lot of my colleagues, it sounds like, are hesitant or reluctant to put all our eggs in one basket, because we've obviously seen there's multiple elements and factors based on the presentation, and there's a lot of information to digest here. So we just want to make sure that we're making the right and strategic and effective decision to prevent these incidents from happening in the future. And I was wondering if there's any benefit in your mind to allocating some more dollars for training or better training or different types of training, because we're just talking about FTEs. We're not talking about getting or training those people to do the right job or become better at what they're doing. So is there a benefit instead of just focusing on the FTE count that we're actually investing in the current people that are doing these difficult jobs?
Madam Chair, our current budget has $265,000 that we use for our legislative training with our staff. As part of the ask for the $1 million, there'll be an opportunity. There's several different training options within our plan, and we'll be looking to allocate the appropriate dollars from the capital funds that are given to us to ensure that we train all staff in the areas that we've identified in our plan.
But why would that be coming from your capital dollars if it's HR related?
So there is a report going to FEDCO tomorrow for an establishment of a one-time capital account for $1 million for training,
yeah, but you
technology,
listed a bunch
and equipment.
Okay.
So it's those three things, and if that's approved, that could go towards funding some of the training, and that's in addition to the $800,000.
What's left over if you're investing in all those things for training, if you're investing that $1 million in all those things you just listed?
So it's finding the balance. So if we look at what we need in terms of the equipment that we need, we'll purchase that. The technology that we've heard is very important in terms of ensuring our accuracy and freeing up staff to be more available to residents. And part of technology is having the required training. So again, we will go back and it gives the general manager the discretion at looking at what the priorities are between the equipment, the training, and the new technology.
Okay, and on that, are we also on this motion, Chair, that we have, are we able to add some flexibility? Because even with the friendly amendment that Councillor Nussbaum brought forward, we're just talking about FTEs. We're not talking about potentially training or some other resources that might be needed to help.
It's a different pool of money. The $800,000 is for hiring staff. The $1 million that we're talking about tomorrow is for training, equipment, and IT.
Yeah, so is there going to be flexibility though from here? Are we able to put some money towards that in case we do need it, if that $1 million's not enough?
You mean some of the $800,000 to the training? No, because we need all of that money for hiring the staff.
Okay, but I guess one of the takeaways for me today is that it's not just an FTE issue, right? It's that there's issues with training and there's other things. So that $1 million's going to be eaten up by quite a bit of capital. There's not much left. So. And that's my concern.
Well, at FEDCO tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the capital requirement. If you think $1 million isn't enough, I think there's an opportunity tomorrow to ask them to augment that amount of money.
Okay. So can staff just confirm that? Is there no flexibility of moving money from what's before us today to things other than the FTEs?
I think that between the $800,000 for the new staff and the $1 million for the equipment, technology, and training, we will have an excellent plan for this year. And any resulting delta or needs going forward, we can identify in the 2019 budget. We've implemented a great number of plans and training to this date with very little to no cost, and so we will continue to do so. And I'm very confident that this injection of funding will go a long way to resolving any pressures that we have this year.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other lacking areas that was mentioned in the presentation was about, the outdated facilities that we have and how some incidents can happen amongst residents. So again, another area where it's been flagged for us and we're not doing anything about it. So do you see my concern here is we're cornering ourselves into one pool of funding. We're not addressing the other issues that were highlighted to us. So how do you address that, or what are your terms for infrastructure improvements to our existing facilities?
So, Madam Chair, currently in the province of Ontario, there's the redevelopment opportunity for long-term care homes. All of our 4 homes are A-bed homes. So the A-bed homes at this time are not eligible for the redevelopment funding. It's focused on B and C beds that are out there in the province. So at some point in time, our beds will be identified for redevelopment, and that'll be an opportunity to look at it. But also, if we're doing renovations within the homes, we can look at with infrastructure and looking at best practices around the design, especially for dementia care units, that we would look at adapting that on any of the renovations that we do in the homes.
Okay. With regards to the volunteers, in the report indicated that they're down. They've been down since 2015. What are some of the issues, or where are we seeing? What's the reason for that? Is there anything? Is it difficult to get people to help out, or is there any specific issues that have been happening to explain the decrease in the number of volunteers?
So, Madam Chair, for the first 3 months of this year, we've seen a 6.5% increase in the volunteer hours from our volunteers. We have over 600 active volunteers in our homes. And Greg alleviated to this earlier, but volunteerism is declining. We're looking at working closely with our families that are associated with residents in the home to be working around getting them registered as volunteers, to see if they can support us around the meal times where it's very difficult for staff because of the pressures. Over 40% of our residents require assistance with feeding. So we need to look at how we're recruiting our volunteers and looking for opportunities to, as I said, engage families, friends of residents, and it is in our strategic plan that that we're actively recruiting volunteers all the time.
Okay, and are they allowed to do some of the physical stuff as well in terms of helping the residents, or are they limited to what they can do? What can a volunteer do at a retirement at one of the group homes?
Madam Chair, our volunteers are used for a number of things, as I said, for feeding residents, porting residents to and from activities, actually running activities in the home. They do friendly one-on-one visits. They will take residents for walks on the property. They do a number of different things. Some of our volunteers are entertainers that come into the home, so they may provide a music program for our residents. They may do a baking program, a sewing, knitting. There's a multitude of position descriptions for our volunteers, and so we have a vast amount of programs that they support in the homes.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and I'm not sure where the motion is at now, but I'd like to see as much flexibility in terms of the direction that's given to staff so that they could utilize those dollars in the most effective and efficient and strategic way to prevent those incidents. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I apparently, unfortunately, cut Councillor Drew short of getting his answer to his question about a review of the management layers. So do you recall the question, and can you answer it?
So a couple of the recommendations that Mr. Fougere put forward was to look at the service delivery model, and in terms of various levels atop and across the homes. So if you look at the attachment to the transmittal report, there is a commitment to doing that. So as part of the 2019 report back and as part of the budget, we will absolutely have completed that review, and we'll be able to look at any efficiencies or any approaches that we can take to balance the homes and make sure that the services and the care is as responsive to residents as possible, and with a focus on direct care.
Perfect. I also want to make sure we are comparing ourselves to other long-term facility in the city with a non-profit and profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Drew. Sorry about that. Okay, so just a couple of questions from me. One, I was told that the report would be released for all to have a copy of today, and then there's been some questions about that actually happening. So looking over to you, Mr. Kanalakis, can you just guarantee that the report will be made available now?
We're going to release it to everybody but John Willing. No, I'm only kidding. No. It will be, Madam Chair, will be released at the end of the meeting. There's just a few little adjustments that Mr. Foucher has committed to make. We found a couple of typos, edits, but it will be released.
Thank you very much for that. And there's also been some questions today about the 2018 budget and the number that was plugged in, if it was artificially low. So I just wanted to give staff an opportunity to answer that question.
So, Madam Chair, the 2017 budget was there was a $12.3 million commitment on behalf of the city. In 2019, it increased to $13.7 million, $870,000 increase, which is a 7% increase. Where you see a difference is between actuals in one year and the actuals in the next year. And that is because any staff absenteeism or modified unit, then we have to, because we're 24/7 and we need to maintain these ratios and we don't want to work short, what we do is we fill those sick leave spots. So what we're finding this year is we are spending above the budget to the same rate as we spent last year, and we'll continue to do so as we respond to the sick leave in our homes, recognizing there's outbreaks that occur, and they vary from year to year. The $800,000 that you're proposing this year would go a long way going forward to having a base budget solution. That would be the budget itself. The actuals will always be higher because we have to replace for sick leave in our homes.
Okay, but if it's consistent year over year that we're replacing for sick leave, wouldn't we do a base budget adjustment to reflect that?
The sick leave requirement varies year over year, and we are working with staff. We are working towards having that healthy workplace and ensuring that the proper practice is in place so there's less injuries and those sorts of things. So it does fluctuate from year to year. At some point, committee may want to look at putting some additional funding for a bit of a balance from year to year, but it does fluctuate from year to year.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. Seeing no further questions, if I can find the motion. Oh, you took it. The motion. Who took it? Toby took it? Okay, well, somebody took the motion. But I think we know what the motion says, right? Yeah, it's just slightly amended to give the staff a little bit more flexibility. Therefore, be it resolved, the Community and Protective Services Committee recommend that City Council approve that 35 new additional FTEs in long-term care services for personal support workers or other new positions as the GM determines are necessary, and that $800,000 be provided from the one-time and unforeseen account to permit the hiring to take place in 2018. Can we carry that motion? Carry? Thank you. And then on the report, carried? Thank you. I think it's carried. There's recommendations in it. Isn't it? Okay, well, you're the lawyer, Toby, but I think... Yeah, okay.
We're receiving the findings. That's all.
Yeah, we're receiving the findings, but the report says that the Community and Protective Service Committee recommend that council. So isn't that a recommendation? So we carry that recommendation and we receive those findings. Okay? Okay. I should go to law school. Okay. So then on notices of motion, inquiries, other business adjourned. Thank you all, and thank you to the staff.